فصل في الحث على طلب العلم والعمل والتعليم واطلب علوم الدين وارقى إلى اليقين فالعلم قوت القلب فيه رضاء الرب.
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalam ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. Nawaitu ta'allum wa ta'lim wa tadhakkur wa tadhkir wa naf'a wal intifa'a wal ifadata wal istifadah wal hath ala tamasuki bi kitabillah wa sunnati rasulihi sallallahu alaihi wasallam wa du'a ilal huda wa dalalata alal khair ibtigha'a wajhillahi wa maradhatih wa qurbihi wa thawabi subhanahu wa ta'ala. Alhamdulillah, all praise be to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who has blessed us with arrival at the month of Rabi'ul Awwal, the month of the birth of our blessed Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And last year, in the year 1444 Hijriyah, we recorded a couple of lessons from the book Al-Insan Al-Kamil, Al-Insan Al-Kamil by Sayyid Muhammad bin Alawi Al-Maliki, or in English, The Perfect Man. And inshallah ta'ala this year, in the year 1445 Hijriyah, we'll continue the series by recording more lessons from the book The Perfect Man, Al-Insan Al-Kamil. So this chapter that we've arrived at now is a chapter entitled Maziyatul Jamal An-Nabawi, meaning the excellence or the maziyah of prophetic beauty, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. When I was young, I used to hear that the Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam was the most handsome of men, and as a consequence, the most handsome of prophets, alayhimus salawatu wassalam. But when I started to learn about our own Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his Shamail, I came to know that this statement needs to be somewhat qualified. One of the principles that we should always bear in mind when reading through the Shamail of our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is that our Prophet Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the pinnacle of human perfection. So the perfection of his beauty must have surpassed the beauty of the Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam. On this point, when we first started discussing this book, Al-Insan Al-Kamil, last year, I mentioned that whatever praiseworthy attribute we find in anyone we come to know of or to read about, we have to know that that same praiseworthy attribute in Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam surpasses that which you find in that person. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam upon khuluqin azim, meaning that his praiseworthy attributes, both outwardly and inwardly, were superior to that found in someone other than him. On this, Sayyid Muhammad bin Alawi Al-Maliki, the author of the book, offered this explanation about the beauty of the Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam compared to the beauty of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He said that Allah mentions this, the speech of the companions of Zulaykha, the wife of one of the chieftains of Egypt at the time of Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam in the Quran. وَقُلْنَا حَاشَ لِلَّهِ مَا هَذَا بَشَرًا إِنْ هَذَا إِلَّا مَلَكٌ كَرِيمٌ. Meaning that they said, glory be to Allah, this is not a human being but rather a noble angel. And they said this about the Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam. They said this when they cut their hands with the knives that were in their hands when they saw the Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam, because they were so mesmerized and distracted by his beauty alayhi salam. But to put the beauty of Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam and the beauty of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in perspective, the Sayyid then mentions some lines of poetry. He said, وَصُحْبُ زُلَيْخَ لَوْ رَأَيْنَا جَبِينَهُ لَآثَرْنَا تَقْطِيعِ الْقُلُوبِ ala aidi. He said that the companions of Zulaykha, the wife of the chieftains of Egypt, if they had just seen the eyebrows of the Prophet ﷺ, they would not have just cut their hands, but they would have pierced their hearts with knives. But they did not do so due to something called the haibah, the awe-inspiring beauty of Rasulullah ﷺ. Sayyid Muhammad Al-Maliki also mentions in The Perfect Man that many of the companions could not have looked directly at Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam because of this haibah, this awe-inspiring beauty or majesty of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And this is why many of the descriptions that we have of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam came from the youngest of them, or those who were in his care before prophethood, such as the narrations of Hind bin Abi Hala and Sayyidina Ali karamallahu wajha. Sayyid Muhammad then mentions reports which mention that he sallallahu alaihi wasallam emitted a type of resplendent light with which his beauty is crowned. You can find some of these reports in Al-Insan Al-Kamil and other books, inshallah ta'ala. In one famous hadith, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself said that the first thing that was created, he said this to Jabir, the companion Jabir, he said, was the light of your Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, O Jabir. And this report doesn't contradict the hadith that mentions that the first thing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created was the pen. Because there's another hadith where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that the first thing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created was the pen. So people might think that there's some contradiction between his speech, him saying that the first thing created was the pen, and him saying that the first thing created was the light of your Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. These two narrations can be synthesized by the fact that the primacy of the pen was only relative to all other than the light of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So to put it another way, it's like me saying that after I built my house and moved into it, and then my mom came to visit me in my house. And after my mom left, my best friend Ahmed came to visit me after my mom did. But when a mutual friend, Sayyid, asked me who was the first to visit my house, I didn't mention to him my mom, but rather I'd say that it was Ahmad, because in this case, the primacy of Ahmad was relative to everyone other than my mom. So the two hadiths are not in contradiction with each other. The light of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was also mentioned in the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, "Qad ja'akum minallah nurun wa kitabun mubin," meaning that there has come unto you a light from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And here it means the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and a clear book. So many of the mufassirin, they would say that the meaning of the nur or the light here is our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In his essence, his very essence is light. So in many narrations, you will find that many of the Sahabi will mention that they saw light emitting from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Some of them mention that when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam spoke, they could see light coming out from between his teeth sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And our mother Aisha said that she was once sitting with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam whilst he was mending his shoe, and he started to sweat, and light began to emit from that sweat. So she became startled, and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam asked her about it, and she said that I saw light coming out from you. She said that if Abu Kabir al-Hudhali had seen you, he would have said that you are most deserving of these lines of poetry in which he said, وَمُبَرَّأٌ مِّن كُلِّ غَرْبَةِ خِيدَةٍ وَفَسَادِ مُرْضِعَةٍ وَدَاءٍ مُغْيَلِ وَإِذَا نَظَرْتَ إِلَى أُسْرَةِ وَجْهِهِ بَرَقَتْ بُرُوكُ الْعَارِضِ الْمُتَهَلِّلِ, meaning free of any recrudescence of menses or corruption of nursing or dangerous illnesses. And when you look at the features of his face, they shine with the radiance of a shimmering cloud. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So now in this last section of this particular chapter, Sayyid Muhammad bin Alawi Al-Maliki, he says that some ignorant people would imagine that the meaning of him being light, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is that his body emits light. He said that this is a delusional and poor understanding of who our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was, because we have seen many people lesser than him sallallahu alaihi wasallam emitting light from their bodies. It happened to some of the companions, and their stories were mentioned in Sayyid Muhammad bin Alawi Al-Maliki's book and from other books as well. And we know the stories of some of the scholars and saints of Islam like Imam Al-Nawawi and others, that they had lights emitting from within them when they were writing books at night, for example. So this was not something that was particularly unique to our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So what we are trying to say here is that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he himself is light. So I'll mention something else to give us a picture of who the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was. In the terminology of Islamic studies, we call someone who is a companion a sahabi. So the linguist would say that the meaning of a companion, a sahib, is someone who has done mulazama wal mukhalata wal muashara bihi. Someone who has been consistent in sitting down, in mixing with him, in being always in his companionship. However, the companionship of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was achieved even with slight interaction with him sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Just momentarily seeing him whilst you were a Muslim, or him looking at you whilst you were a Muslim, would raise you to the rank of a companion, a sahabi. And why was this so? It was because of the light of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the same thing cannot be said of the companions of companions, the tabi'in. The tabi'in, we say that they are companions. They did not meet the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but rather they met the companions of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So they are only called tabi'in if they actually had mulazama, mukhalata, and muashara with the companions of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Why? Because the companions did not emit the kind of light that was emitted by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Because of his nur, we say that anyone who comes in touch with him, even slightly, even momentarily, he would be raised in rank and become a sahabi, a companion of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So with this, we end this lesson, and we hope that you will go and refer to Sayyid Muhammad bin Alawi Al-Maliki's book Al-Insan Al-Kamil, The Perfect Man, and read through the stories and try to understand the reality of our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam, walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.